Good afternoon. I'm Mina Levin. Welcome to the North Carolina Museum of Art. I'm in the West Building in our Judaic galleries, and I'm so pleased that all of you are here today with us. I am particularly pleased to introduce to you Gabe Goldstein. Gabe is the expert curator for the Judaic collection, and he is going to give us an overview of this collection and its origins. Thank you so much, Gabe, for being with us today.
Thank you, Mina. I'm delighted to be here virtually and delighted that you're there actually in the gallery so we can appreciate the beauty of the space and the beauty of the artifacts that we have on display proudly in the North Carolina Museum of Art collection. And I wanted to give you a chance to understand better the history and origins of this collection and really the beauty of the entirety of the space.
I just need to get my stuff.
Okay. So you get a chance to see the gallery a bit on the left of your screen. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to understand how we got here, how North Carolina Museum of Art became this pioneer space for the exhibition and collection of art treasures from the Jewish tradition. The collection really owes its origins to one individual, to Dr. Abram Kanoff. Dr. Abram Kanoff's life spanned the 20th century. He was born in the Russian Empire in 1903, moved as a very small child to America, grew up in Brooklyn, was a pediatrician, and retired, but was far from retiring in North Carolina. After his arrival in North Carolina, he inspired the museum to create an exhibition of Judaic art, of objects of Jewish ceremony, which displayed artistry and beauty. And in 1975, he helped to organize the first exhibition of this in North Carolina. And one of the very first efforts by an encyclopedic art museum to display and portray the beauty of objects related to Jewish tradition and ritual. The following year, as part of a bicentennial effort, really with the courage and pioneering spirit and energy of Dr. Kanoff, the museum, working with Dr. Kanoff, initiated a project to establish a permanent Judaic art collection and a permanent Judaic art gallery. And then in 1983, in the original building of the North Carolina Museum of Art, they opened up a new permanent gallery of a permanent collection of Judaic art. Really the first encyclopedic art museum to venture into this area and to have this level of inclusivity to depict the importance and the quality of Jewish ceremonial art within the corpus of established art history. If we go to the next gallery, next slide, we can see the gallery for a moment. This is the gallery. It was soon after its opening in 1984. And we have beautiful black and white installation shots of this gallery, which really showed the quality and beauty of objects from across the world. Objects that Dr. Kanoff himself donated to the collection, and objects which he was able to help locate and help find donors to build the collection. When I think of Dr. Kanoff's efforts, it reminds me of a biblical legend, a rabbinic legend, a midrash, based on the biblical narrative of the splitting of the Red Sea. And when the children of Israel got to the Red Sea, it was still just this body of water, and they had no idea what to do with the Egyptians coming after them. But there was one individual, Nachshon, who had the bravery and the vision and the courage to just jump in. And after he jumped into the water, the seas split. And it's the vision and energy and courage of this individual which inspired this change, which made this change and miracle possible. And that's really the kind of effort Dr. Kanoff brought to North Carolina, to the North Carolina Museum of Art, and to really being a pioneer in the recognition of Judaic art as part of the important world of beauty and history in an encyclopedic art museum. And if we see the next slide, we'll see again Dr. Kanoff's effort. And Dr. Kanoff served as the main cheerleader of the gallery, the main interpreter and docent, the curator itself, and really the rallying spirit for Judaic art in North Carolina, and in many ways for Judaic art internationally. If we look at the next slide, we'll see the gallery in its full beauty. It really was a jewel box of a gallery with this deep plum gallery, really showing off the beauty of the metalwork in silver and gilding and other media that really were intensified by the glory of this small jewel box in the East Building. One more, please, slide. And we continue to see Dr. Kanoff, who throughout his life, and he passed away in 1999, just at the fin de siècle, he continued to inspire visitors of all ages about the beauty and importance and history of this collection. And as he formed the collection really reflects his own history, his own personal involvement and integrity, and his vision of this artistry. So I want to give you a few examples of some of the early pieces in the collection that Dr. Kanoff helped to bring to Raleigh, and how they show both the importance of Judaic art and Dr. Kanoff's own personal story. Next slide, please. One of the treasures of this collection is this small prayer book and binding. And this binding of this prayer book, a prayer book for the high holidays in the autumn season, was created by an artist named Ilya Schor, who was active in America and the United States, but drew on his own heritage from Eastern European communities and Eastern European folk art as expressed in metalwork and also in paper cut and other artistic motifs and techniques. What's very special about this book and cover, really it's the cover, which is the work of art, is that it was a gift that Dr. Kanoff commissioned from Schor as a 25th anniversary gift for his wife. And he chose the motifs and the iconographic program with Schor very carefully. And it's centered on the lives of the four matriarchs, the biblical matriarchs, and also includes depictions of Dr. Kanoff and his wife's two daughters, Elizabeth and Margot Kanoff. And many of you may know Elizabeth Kanoff, as she is the co-chair of the Friends of the Judaic Art Gallery in Raleigh. If we look at the next image, we're able to see a close-up of the cover, and we see the inscription in English, "To Frances with love." Frances was Dr. Abram Kanoff's wife. She was a dermatologist like her daughter. Dr. Kanoff was a pediatrician. The square scenes that depict scenes from Jewish life and the four matriarchs, and the small girls who are shown in the center of the book cover. And these motifs may be familiar to some of you, and you'll get a chance to see them with Mina in a moment as we pass through the actual gallery, as this cover is depicted in the large scrims, which beautify the gallery and give a sense of the space. Next slide, please. Dr. Kanoff's pioneering area activities in Judaic art were not limited to Raleigh and to the North Carolina Museum of Art, but he truly was a pioneer in this field. And one of his most important efforts was the founding of the Toby Pasher Workshop. Toby Pasher was his mother-in-law, and he named the workshop in her memory and honor. And this was a workshop for contemporary ceremonial Judaica art and artistry and metalsmithing at the Jewish Museum in New York. And they recruited the best of contemporary artists, artisans working in this field. The most famed being the artist who created this seder plate. It is a 3-tiered plate for the ritual foods of the seder evening ceremony, the home ceremony marking the Passover holiday and the freedom from slavery in Egypt. And as you can see, this is a thoroughly modernist piece. I had just commented that this piece is as if someone got Mies van der Rohe to create a piece of Judaic ceremonial art. And it's this pure, unadulterated, mechanical, industrial, modernist vocabulary, which Wolpert brought to Judaica, brought to this very traditional form in the most up-to-date idiom possible. And Wolpert and his prime student, Moshe Zabari, were the leading artists of the Toby Pasher Workshop. Wolpert herself had trained in the Bauhaus school in Germany, and this is a pure Bauhaus piece. It was originally designed in 1930 when Wolpert was still at Bauhaus. This is a later version of the piece. The collection at North Carolina is really rich with examples of this modernist idiom, by both Wolpert and Zabari. It's a tribute both to the artistry of mid-century creativity in this field, inspired at the Toby Basher workshop by Dr. Kanoff, and Dr. Kanoff's own connections to the workshop in New York and to the museum in Raleigh. Next piece, please. After Dr. Kanoff's passing in 1999, soon thereafter, I was invited to come down to Raleigh and look at the collection and understand it better, and to imagine what could happen next, how the collection could continue forward in Dr. Kanoff's spirit, but without his activity in the gallery itself. I recall we had a gathering of people who were interested in the gallery, and I was asked what was my favorite piece, what piece in the collection from its early origins spoke to me the most. And I commented, this piece really excited me. This is a brass large wall plaque for the eastern wall of a house of prayer, for a synagogue, to mark the direction of prayer. And Jews all over the world, across the centuries, across the millennia, when they were involved in prayer, faced towards Jerusalem. Generally, that was facing east, but there were Jews who faced west, and there were Jews in ancient synagogues in the land of Israel who faced north and south, as well as today. This piece combines multiple aspects in its imagery and iconography of traditional Jewish symbols, the crown of the Torah, the lions of Judah, the pillars of the Holy Temple of Jerusalem, in an idiom which is both highly sophisticated and also evokes folk art traditions of the region of Eastern Europe. We're not exactly sure where it comes from, but we know it probably comes from a crossroads in terms of this mix of sophistication with a folk inflection. And we think it comes either from a place known as Danzig or Gdansk today in Poland, or a place known as Bratislava, or previously known as Pressburg, which today is in Slovakia. These were parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and by the multiple names required to describe the geographic location, we see that crossroads and the mixing of cultures across borders. And it's that mixing of borders, yet constancy of vision towards belief and prayer and spirituality, and also a belief in the power and beauty and the artistry that Dr. Kanoff brought and that this work exemplifies. And this work itself actually embodies a biblical verse, which I find particularly meaningful. And that verse is written and recorded in Jeremiah 31:21. And the verse reads from the Hebrew Bible, "Erect markers, set up signposts, keep in mind the highway, the road that you traveled, return made in Israel." So in preparation for a return to the land, we set up signs. And the word for these signs actually in Hebrew is sionim. That's the word in Hebrew, Sion, for Zion. So the idea of this looking towards Zion, which this signpost, this wall marker evokes in Raleigh, in Bratislava, in Danzig, across borders, gives this constancy of vision and direction from the Bible and onward, this pioneering spirit and this vision for going forward that Dr. Kanoff brought to the museum, brought to the community, and how we can see going forward. And I'm particularly inspired when I think about this collection and this gallery at the North Carolina Museum of Art and Dr. Kanoff's own efforts, because it exemplifies 50 years ago something that we're trying to do very much at this very moment today and onward. How one individual and how a community and grassroots efforts can create an impetus and create energy and courage and vitality for a broader inclusion, for a broader sense of diversity, for a broader sense of artistry and equity. And as we across America and in the North Carolina Museum of Art and internationally reach out to broaden our conversation of what belongs in the Encyclopedic Art Museum, of what belongs on the walls in our institution, what belongs in our hearts and in our society and in our world at large, we learn from this wall marker, we learn from our hearts towards spirituality, we learn from this grasp of artistry and history, and very much we follow in those footsteps and bravery of jumping in from Nachshon and from Dr. Kanoff, and were inspired by beauty and by meaning. So I invite you with Mina to really be able to visit this gallery filled with beauty and spirituality in a way on your screens, and I hope very soon, together, all of us in the space of this gallery, to be immersed and embodied by the power of the Judaic Art Gallery and its collections. Mina, up to you.
Thank you, Gabe. What an amazing presentation. We're so lucky to have Gabe with us here today and to be working as the expert specialist curator for this collection. This West building opened, which was designed by Thomas Pfeiffer of New York, opened in the spring of 2010. At that time, there were 2 galleries for the Judaica collection. Since that time, it has expanded to 3. We are going to walk through all 3 of them today and visit more closely 6 particular ceremonial art objects and learn about them. Come walk with me. Over the last 20 years, this collection has grown very significantly, thanks to the generous donations from the Kanoff family, the Friends of the Judaic Art Gallery, and donors from across North Carolina and elsewhere. The objects here come from Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the United States, and they date from the early 18th century up until the current times. We are now in the first gallery I want to show you, where everything in here is related to worship in the synagogue. First of all, I wanted to point out that there is an eternal light. And next, I wanted to show you in person the Eastern wall marker that Gabe was just discussing. You can see it's fairly substantial in size, and I'm so proud that it's actually on the east wall of the gallery. Now, all the objects here are used in a synagogue, and we have 2 displays showing different style of Torah cases. What is a Torah? Well, a Torah is written by a very specialized scribe in Hebrew that covers the first 5 books of the Bible, beginning with Genesis, also known as the 5 books of Moses. Let's look at a very unusual Torah case over here. This is a Torah case with finials that dates back to 1887. The artist is unknown. It was donated in 2006 by the Zukowski family. It's all silver, some of which is gilded, and the finials on top, which are the small ornaments on top of staves, may have been added later. It was definitely made, we now know, in Canton, China, now known as Guangzhou. It's 38.5 inches tall and 11.5 inches in diameter. It's ornate and flowery, and notice the tiny little bells up top around the centerpiece and around the edges of the finials. Now the silver here, this case is called a tick, T-I-K, and it will open into 2 halves. The Torah would have been wrapped around rollers or staves on the inside, and the Torah would have been read from inside this case. The silver here has gone through many processes for this final appearance. It has been cast, die stamped. It's been worked with a method called replicas, which is when you turn the silver over and hammer onto the back of it into a mold, and then the silver can be turned back over, worked from the front with a method known as chasing. This particular case has a very fascinating history. It was made in China for a congregation in Bombay, India, now known as Mumbai, for Jewish people who had come there from Baghdad. As a matter of fact, this top dome is a style similar to other Iraqi Torahs, but the heavy flowery decoration is typical for the Chinese makers. And note the small crown-like toppings on top of the finials. Are these small British crowns? We're very lucky to have it. It's a very rare specimen. After India was granted independence in 1947, this Torah eventually traveled to Haifa, Israel, and later came to the museum. Gabe, what can you tell us about this Torah case's history and its meaning?
So something I really find fascinating and charming and endearing about this piece is its international sense. So there was a large group of Iraqi emigres living in India in major trade centers, and they were part of an international trade community across centers of the British Empire primarily, including centers in China and in Hong Kong and in what was formerly known as Burma and Myanmar and elsewhere, and as well as often having family connections in England itself and in Manchester and ports. And this is a piece which really embodies that sense of diaspora, of a flowing forward of Jews to different centers and how they take their most precious objects, their most sacred objects, the Torah scroll, and literally embody them within a container which shows this various parts of their origins and connections across international borders. So your community, which has moved at some point in ancient history, literally to Iraq, which is Babylonia. So from the very first diaspora of Nebuchadnezzar, then across British colonial patterns into India, using their trade connections of the larger international world from China to commission a piece, which really reflects Iraqi heritage. And what's something also intriguing to think about is the overall form of the Torah case, of the teak, which you can see when you look at the entire shape with its large onion-shaped bulb dome, actually echoes the architecture of the region, of Arab lands, of Islamic lands, and it's very similar to a minaret, to a tower shape of a mosque for the call for prayer. So not only are they echoing the traditions of the Torah, traditions of Baghdad and Iraq and India and China, but they're even echoing Islamic culture and Islamic architecture in a piece of pure Jewish ceremony to house the most sacred object in Jewish life. Mina?
Thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Gabe. That was very informative. I want to look next at another work of ceremonial art in this gallery that also has a multi-layered history. This case shows how some Torahs would have been covered with cloth mantles. They all have finials larger than the ones we just saw. And I want to look in particular at the set of finials right here in the middle. This set of Torah finials dates to about 1765, and we know its maker this time. His name was Willem Hendrik Rozier. They are made out of silver with some brass, and Rozier made these for the Great Synagogue in Amsterdam. The synagogue itself actually dated back to 1671. They were a donation in 2007 from a number of families and couples who are friends of the Judaic Art Gallery. And they stand 16 5/8 inches tall, and they are each 5.5 inches wide. Now, Rozier was a known metalsmith, but we don't know much else about him. There are other existing finials that have his maker's mark on them, but these do not. And look at the form that they take. They look like towers, and you see 3 levels of arches and columns with a gilded crown on top and bells hanging pretty much everywhere. Where would Rozier have seen such a tower? Well, actually, this is close to the tower, the way the tower looked at the old church in Amsterdam. The bells both provide beauty, and they make a beautiful sound as the Torah is carried around the synagogue during services. Jewish immigrants came to Amsterdam eventually after their expulsion from Spain and Portugal in the late 15th century. They were later joined by other Jewish peoples from Germany and Eastern Europe all of them seeking the freedom of worship which they could obtain in Amsterdam. By the time of World War II, there were 10,000 Jewish people in Amsterdam, approximately 10% of the population. However, as we know, this population was decimated during the Holocaust. The synagogue was looted, including this pair of finials. By the time they came to the museum years later, they were significantly damaged. They were repaired by an expert metalsmith. Some of the bells had to be replaced, and they're all a slightly different color than the ones from that were original, so they can always be told apart.
My apologies if Mina's sound isn't quite up to snuff. I think I may be coming in clearer because I'm not mic'd, so I will try for a minute. What's really intriguing with this pair is that they do come from 17th century, 18th century Holland, but they're part of a tradition of Golden Age Amsterdam, which was a center we know of great artistry. And I'm really moved how this collection reflects and connects to the painting and fine art collection of the NCMA with its very powerful holdings in 17th and 18th century Dutch painting, the age of Rembrandt, the golden age of art in Amsterdam. And that is part of this culture, part of a Protestant culture, a mercantile culture, an international culture in Amsterdam that allowed for the fruition of these pieces. And then the fact that you were able to purchase these pieces and acquire them recently, as we continue to build the collection after Dr. Kanoff's passing, very much through the leadership of John Coffey, the curator of American art and the curator of art and judaica at North Carolina. And John, I've had the privilege of working with John over these past decades. And what's wonderful is we know exactly that, we don't know exactly, but we know that these were from the synagogue and then were saved and kept in the synagogue. And in many ways, we are able to reclaim and preserve objects of history after the Holocaust, objects that in many ways there was a strong break in their continuity of use. They've been continuing use in Amsterdam over the centuries, but the community is greatly diminished. And now there's an opportunity for these objects and their sanctity and their beauty to live on in a different context. You were looking with Mina, we were together, at the case with these 3 dress Torah scrolls in their textile cloaks. This is one of the star elements of the North Carolina Museum of Art, Judaic art display, is that one of the great objects of Judaic art are Torah silver, how the Torah scroll itself is ornamented in ritual, in the synagogue practice, with a multiple of objects, finials that go atop the staves, frequently a Torah shield going across the front, and a Torah pointer to follow the reading. And in this situation, what we have done is we've been able to create historic replicas of different silhouettes of the Torah covering, the Torah mantle from different periods. Here we have on the Amsterdam example, the classic type, Amsterdam type as seen in the Portuguese synagogue of Amsterdam with this flared skirt and kind of these inserted bands, like panniers almost, and a more narrow example with a pair of finials and a shield of the traditional Eastern European type, actually coming from a synagogue originally in most recently in North Carolina, that is no longer using these objects, and a more modern set by Moshe Zabari, who I mentioned before, with a 20th century type of mantle. And these mantles, we are able to rotate them in different colors as they change seasonally for the Jewish festivals in the traditional Jewish practice in synagogues. They really show the beauty and the strength of the Torah as presented in the synagogue. You're able to understand the Torah silver as separate objects, but also in the context of the overall Torah forms. And one of the beautiful aspects of this gallery and of the North Carolina Museum new building design is that it's bathed in this beautiful light from the oculi above. But that light means that we cannot exhibit in the gallery original works of textile art because they would be put at risk of fading and damage. And as conservators and as preservers of objects in a museum context, we couldn't possibly display that. But by using these replicas that are historically accurate and depict the type of mantle and the form of the mantle and the silhouette of the Torah, we're able to get a much better idea of the presentation of ritual objects in synagogue life and how these objects were designed to beautify the Torah itself, in this case, at the far end of the gallery, which is designed to echo the shape of the Torah ark, which is the main focus of the synagogue space, where the Torah scrolls, the dressed Torah scrolls, are stored. Mina, are you back and mic'd?
Yes, we are, and I apologize for any technical difficulties. Sometimes we have some sparse Wi-Fi here in the West Building. And thank you, Gabe, for remembering to thank John Coffey, who has obviously played a very important role in building this collection and working in collaboration with you. Now we're in the second gallery, where the ceremonial objects are purposed for home use on a weekly basis and throughout the year. And first I want to point out, and they're a little hard to visualize because of the lighting, the two hanging panels of cloth or scrims behind me that are taken from the front and back covers of the Ilya Schor prayer books that Gabe showed you earlier. Over here, in this case to our right, we have art pieces that celebrate the Jewish holiday of Passover in the spring, where we celebrate at home with a ceremony and dinner called a seder to commemorate the flight of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. Right here we have the Wolpert Seder plate that Gabe has shown you the slide of. Really beautiful in person. And over here on the bottom level, we have an even more contemporary Seder plate designed by Iris Tutnauer. This was designed in 1996, made in 2004, and given to the museum in 2014 by Harriet Weinstein, a longstanding docent, and her husband, Al Weinstein. The top layer is silver. It's engraved with the names of the food items used during the Seder. The other layers, and I believe there are 13, are silver-covered copper. Wisely, from a design element, the glass containers, which are hand-blown, are easily removable for washing. And as you look down through the glass containers, you get a beautiful vision of all the descending layers underneath. Ms. Tutnauer is an Israeli silversmith who lives and works in Jerusalem. Born in 1964, she graduated from the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design. Her work is focused on combining contemporary art with traditional Jewish concepts. She describes this work as showing two ideas. First, the haste and simplicity that evokes the rapid departure of the Jewish people from Egypt in the story of Passover. And second, using the layers here to represent the many generations of the Jewish people. Gabe, what do you want to add to our understanding of this beautiful object?
Well, we love this object. It's really very engaging, and you see how it's so tactile and could so readily be used at a Seder table in a home. One of the things that it represents is how this collection continues to evolve and continues to follow in the footsteps of Dr. Kanoff in looking at contemporary design, contemporary artistry, and modern art, connected to the contemporary and modern art collection of the North Carolina Museum of Art as a whole. And also that Tutnauer is a female artist. Almost all the pieces we have from earlier periods are made by male silversmiths. And this is a new aspect of a broadening and inclusion, which we are seeing in Judaic art. There are textile pieces from much earlier made by female makers, but there's very little female silversmith work until the recent periods. One of the aspects that I find particularly charming about this piece, or also conceptually and art historically intriguing, is how it breaks from the traditions and approaches of modernist, rigid, one could even say masculine design, as seen in the Ludwig Wolpert multi-layered Seder plate, and uses a more biomorphic, organic shape, and how that shape itself, this multiple layers, actually also evokes in the metalwork the hand-baked shmura matzah, hand-baked matzah, the unleavened bread of the Passover evening and the Passover festival, and as evoked in this really engaging and beautiful and contemporary idiom of design.
Thank you, Gabe. Let's walk this way through this middle gallery. The works in the center case are all purposed for use on the Sabbath. And then I want to go on past this other set of scrims to our third gallery, which contains the real jewels of the collection. And in particular, I want to start with the fourth object we're going to look at, which is back here. This Torah crown is attributed to Zwain Cotini, a master silversmith in Venice, Italy. It dates to the early 17th century. This gorgeous piece was donated in 2017 by the Fierstein, Geltzel, Sandman, and Goralick families. It's again made with silver that has been worked with repoussé and chasing, and it has attached ornaments, which we'll show you in just a minute. Torah crowns such as this one were commonly seen in Italian synagogues, and they surround the finials on top of the Torah. Notice that the crown is worked in an ornate baroque style, and there are 5 identical repeating sections. Each section also has a small gilded ornament at the bottom, which relates to the ancient temple in Jerusalem and worshiping there. As they're gilded, they stand out. For example, right here, we have one referencing the Ark of the Covenant. And then to the left of it, a priestly garment. The other ornaments depict a flaming altar, a high priest's wrapped turban or mitre, and the priestly hands of blessing. On the horizontal base, we also find Cotini's initials, as well as a city mark. So we know it was made in Venice, probably for a synagogue in nearby Mantua. And if you look down on it from above, which Luke is going to do right now, you can see the supporting rods which surround the finials. This crown has quickly become very important to the museum, being one of the oldest items in the Judaica collection and a very popular work at Art and Bloom here in 2019. Gabe, what can you tell us about how this crown fits into the North Carolina Museum of Art collection as a whole?
So one of the great things I find about the Judaica art collection is how it connects to the overall collection of the North Carolina Museum of Art. When I first came to Raleigh and was able to visit the museum, I was really taken aback at the quality and quantity of the early painting collection, of the old masters, of the Renaissance and Baroque Italian paintings. And we look at the Renaissance and Italian Baroque paintings, we see parallels here in the way that the silversmith Cotini has handled the work for this Torah crown. We see the sense of drama, the really strong interplay of dark and light, the flow and the use of Baroque motifs of ornaments, the connection to antiquity in the use of the urns, the really three-dimensionality as created in this work, particularly in the floral motifs that are created. You see here the interplay in the deep and dark repoussé, the play from, as we said before, from hammering from the back and then chasing from the front to create this great sense of three-dimensionality, which is captured also in painting. Here we see the sense of antiquity in the amphora forms, supporting these wonderful three-dimensional floral motifs and bouquets that are actually made of layered, cut out silver, like almost like you might imagine a paper flower being made of multiple layers of paper for the petals. There's this great sense of dimensionality, of drama, of play of dark and light. And those are true aspects of Italian late Renaissance and Baroque as captured in painting and as captured in silver. So it's really a conversation across the galleries, from the painting galleries to the Judaic art gallery.
Thank you, Gabe. And lastly, we want to focus on 2 large Hanukkah lamps that usually live in this gallery. And the timing is ideal, as this year, the festival of Hanukkah, starts the evening of December 10th. First of all, I want to show you this standing Hanukkah lamp for a synagogue, made from a copper alloy in 1770, 1771. This lamp was purchased at auction in 2013 and donated by Thomas and Louise Coffey. One of the very few items in the Judaica collection that is not made of silver. This lamp was made by an unknown artist in Eastern Europe, probably in Ukraine or Poland, and some parts were likely added in the 1800s. It's an imposing lamp standing 5 feet tall, making it an appropriate size for use in a synagogue. Like other Hanukkah lamps, it's modeled after the candelabrum or menorah in the ancient temple. But this one has 8 branches and a 9th for the lighting candle instead of the 7 total branches that were seen in the ancient form. This one is decorated with buds and branches as described in the ancient menorah, but it also has some very unusual aspects. Look at the lions here on the base holding it up, the flowery ornaments around the middle stem, and the spread-winged eagle with a crown on the top. The eagle is partially gilded and may have referred to either the Polish or Prussian ruler. Now, this lamp has a lot of importance to us also, as many of these synagogue lamps were destroyed during the Holocaust. But we know that this lamp in the 1920s belonged to a Jewish family in Vienna. In 1927, their daughter married a businessman from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The lamp moved to Pittsburgh with them and therefore was saved from destruction. Gabe, this lamp has a very special Hanukkah story of its own, and I hope you will tell it to us now.
This lamp, we were so excited when we were able to acquire this lamp, and it's such a beautiful piece. It means so much, such a rich history. But it has another story which really shows how the North Carolina Museum of Art has taken the Judaic art collection and used it as a way to build understanding, to build bridges, and a way of messaging for the Raleigh community, for the nation, and beyond. And I was very struck the morning after the tragic shooting on a Saturday, on a Sabbath, at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, to receive an email from John Coffey saying, "We have to respond. What can we do?" And we talked a little bit back and forth in email, and we came up with an idea. And this lamp, because as you've heard, was actually in Pittsburgh in the 1920s and was saved from destruction. It's a synagogue lamp because it was sent to Pittsburgh. Gave us an opportunity to use the lamp and the symbol of the menorah from the Bible and the symbol of a Hanukkah light, the symbol of a lamp showing freedom, a lamp showing hope, to both mourn for loss, but really to use art as a way to come together, and a way to mourn this devastating loss and to move forward as a community and as a nation. So unbelievably, for any of you who know how museums operate, museums are, the North Carolina Museum of Art is closed on Monday. And in one day, really with the work of the entire museum staff, from art handlers to graphic artists, to curators, to myself working from New York and John working in Raleigh, we were able to do something. And what we did is we removed the lamp from here in the Judaic Art Gallery, and we moved it right to the very front entrance of the museum building. And if I go to the next slide, please, you can see the artwork, the menorah installed there. So as soon as any visitor entered into the museum, the very first piece they saw was the menorah, a work of synagogue art, a work of Jewish ceremonial art. And with it was a very special label we created and produced in this one day as a call for mourning, a call for a sense of loss, and a call for a sense of hope and light and brightness, and how the saving of this menorah into Pittsburgh was emblematic of a saving of our society, a saving of our culture, of light and hope and going forward. And alongside that, in this place where the menorah had been displayed in this Judaic Art Gallery, we did something very special. Next slide, please. Can I go to the next slide, please? what we did is we placed a torn black cloth in the spot where the synagogue lamp normally stood in the gallery as a symbol of grief and loss. And this is both a traditional Jewish act of mourning, which we know from the Bible and onward, the tearing, the rending of cloth of a garment as a sign of mourning, of a sign of the mourner, of a sign of loss, and also the hanging of a black cloth as a symbol of loss, and really a multicultural symbol of mourning and loss, and something which also resonates very strongly in art museums from the 1980s and onward. Just a couple days ago, we've had this, the International AIDS Day, the Day Without Art, when artworks were removed or covered and replaced with black cloth as a sign of communal mourning, a sign of loss, and a call of art as a power of healing and a power of correction and a power of inclusion. And this menorah, this synagogue menorah in a museum has a new message, a message of hope, a message of grief, and a message of moving forward. And Hanukkah itself, which is a festival of rededication, the rededication and the purification of the temple in Jerusalem, becomes symptomatic of this activity of rededication, of going forward, of a recognition of sorrow and loss, and a recognition of hope. Now you see on the right of the black cloth, the Torah crown from Venice we just discussed. And on the other side, you see another Hanukkah menorah, a new acquisition over the past years, really the first new major acquisition in the post-Dr. Kanoff era of the Judaic Art Gallery. And Mina will now discuss this piece, as will I, to again embody some of the beauty of the collection and some of its messaging and potential. Mina.
Thank you, Gabe. This standing Hanukkah lamp, this time we do know the artist designer. His name was Zev Rabban, and he worked at the Bezalel workshop. The Bezalel workshop dates back to 1906. It was established to produce art that blended Jewish traditions with Middle Eastern and European influences to make a unique style. It continues today as the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design, located in Jerusalem, and it maintains a multidisciplinary approach to art education. This large lamp was designed around 1926 by Rabban and probably made a few years later by a Yemeni metalsmith. That metalsmith's family still runs a silver metalsmith business. It stands 35.5 inches tall, and again, it's made from silver that was worked in the repoussé style, and it was also etched. This lamp also has a lot of filigree work, which is a fine braid-like material that you see in a number of locations here. Filigree comes from the Latin word for thread and grain, and was once made from grains of metal or beads. Filigree has existed for thousands of years and is often seen in jewelry. This lamp sits on a wooden base and is decorated with colored glass inserts. It was given to the museum in 2005 using funds from one of our endowments, the Robert Pfeiffer bequest, from donations from Friends of the Judaic Art Gallery and from Joanne Pizer Fox and Stanley Fox. Gabe is now going to tell us how this particular Hanukkah lamp has its own very special Hanukkah story.
So this lamp was able to be part of a great celebration, a continuing celebration of the festival which we begin this week. And that really was part of this Judaic Art Gallery in Raleigh, reaching a new level of national prominence and really making this lamp into a living ceremonial object. And I go to the next slide, please. And that is that just a few years ago, in 2015, this lamp was lit at the White House. It was lit with, as you can see, a smiling Barack Obama and maybe a semi-smiling Michelle Obama by a cheerfully singing Reuven Rivlin, who is the president of the state of Israel. And we had the privilege of bringing this lamp to the White House for the annual Hanukkah celebration at the White House, and for it to be kindled by the president of Israel side by side with the president of the United States. So really the lamp lives on as a lamp of celebration, of a lamp of unity, this connection between the United States and Israel, between Raleigh and the entire nation. And it's really a great sense of pride for the Judaic art collection in Raleigh to reach this level of international and national sophistications and significance. And as I've said many times, really we think of how this collection is embedded and embodied in the full nature of the North Carolina Museum of Art, and a national and international conversation on the artistry and artistic value and integrity of art connected to the Jewish tradition and Jewish ritual. And that's why I'd like to show you one more slide, which those of you who have an opportunity to visit the museum now and in the next weeks will be able to see. And that is how this map is no longer at this very moment on display in the Judaic Art Gallery itself, but rather is part of a special exhibition, Reflections on Light, on how the power and beauty of light is conveyed in multiple artworks throughout the North Carolina Museum of Art, across geography, across time, and how light is this symbol of hope and of beauty and of reflection. Reflections on Light is the exhibition's title. And we really feel privileged to see Judaic artwork displayed side by side in the museum with the finest paintings, and in a conversation of the quality and the meaning of light within various works of art of the collection. So I invite you to come to the Judaic Art Gallery and to come to this exhibition to experience this. Mina and I really feel privileged to be able to invite you into this gallery to get a sense of the history and the meaning and really the artistic quality and beauty of this collection. Mina?
Thank you, Gabe. I want to particularly thank Gabe for his attendance today. I want to thank Angela Lombardi, whose idea this was, and who's been such a great organizer, and our amazing videographer, Luke Mahaffey. Angela, do we have some questions in chat to address?
All right, I'm going to read through some of the chat questions that have come up, and we will toggle between Gabriel and Mina for some answers. So one of the first questions that we had, there we go, yes. Has there ever been a question of provenance with any of these pieces?
So all acquisitions at the museum are researched very carefully for provenance. And I must say, North Carolina Museum of Art is really a leader in this field. It was the first major art museum in America to have a piece in its collection, the Kranach, with a major Nazi-era provenance issue, and that was resolved so amicably for all involved. We researched very carefully the provenance on every piece, both the ones that were in the collection previously, before I involved, and certainly our major acquisitions over the past decades. I will note that for Judaic objects, it is often very, very challenging to come up with complete documentation of provenance. In so many situations, particularly in European material, due to World War II and the upheavals and objects being lost and hidden and looted and moved on, there isn't the same kind of paper trail as there might be for paintings that were in the commercial marketplace for most of their history. We do try very hard. We are able to document a great deal. We very frequently are most intrigued and most excited to acquire objects for which we have exacting provenance. And we don't give up. We continue to work hard. I have a meeting tomorrow with two provenance experts to discuss a particular object. It's something that we take very, very seriously. If you mean there have been provenance issues where we've ever had a claim against an object, that has not occurred as of yet, and I hope never.
Thank you so much.
Very, very cautious.
Thank you so much. I'll move on to the next question. Lauren Weinberger asks, or notes, I've often noted that the Judaic artifacts exhibited are composed almost entirely of religious ritual objects, Torah scrolls, cases, yads, Kiddush cups, etc. Can you speak to this and the dearth of secular artifacts?
Certainly, that exactly is the focus and definition of this collection as it was founded and as defined by Dr. Kanoff initially, and then continues to be refined and defined. We deal with ceremonial art, with ritual objects. There are many objects, and increasingly so, in the North Carolina collection, which are connected to Jewish history and life. The John Coffey in particular, but other curators as well, are increasingly interested in finding ways to connect between that. It is an art collection, so it looks at ceremonial art in terms of artistry and quality. We want pieces that, as you've heard, echo the quality of art of every other collection piece. We're not looking for pieces that are simply ritual in terms of use, but do not have a level of artistry and craftsmanship which is equal to any other piece in the North Carolina Museum of Art Fine Art collection. Works that connect to Jewish history or to Jews as artists themselves in fine arts are included elsewhere in the collection, or pieces that are adjacent and connected to Jewish life and study. For example, the work for the study which was recently exhibited in the museum, the study for the murals in the Boston Public Library, which include Hebrew inscriptions.
Thank you very much. We do have a question that I want to address directly. Is it possible to download slides of the items? I do want to note that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on YouTube for viewing. And you may contact me directly if you have any questions about particular images.
That's a work by John Singer Sargent, the Boston Public Library paintings. I just didn't mention that. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Virginia and Danny. Thank you for this wonderful tour. Does the museum have any Torah scrolls in their collection?
The museum is an art museum. It does not collect manuscripts that are unadorned. So it doesn't really have Torah scrolls. We do have a segment of a Torah scroll, which was used on display at one point to give it so that there would be a sense of how a Torah scroll would be used within a Torah case and to explain the Torah scroll to visitors. But it really is not part of the Judaic art collection per se. It's not a work of art, and it is not a complete Torah scroll. Again, this is an art museum and not a history or culture museum.
Thank you. We have another question. What are the multicolored objects on the China-India Torah cover?
So those are the small jewel type things. They're not real jewels. They're glass or I would say, semi-precious at best stones that are used for ornamentation and decoration on this piece.
Wonderful. Okay. Were both the synagogue and pieces used in homes actually used in these settings, or were they created primarily as works of art?
Almost all the pieces we have here were actually initially in use, in ritual use, as far as we know, within synagogue or home contexts. They've been around for a while, and that was what they were made for. They wouldn't have gone straight into collectors' homes to be put behind glass. The only exceptions to that may be some of the most contemporary ritual objects, which were made both for use, but may have been acquired by the museum before they ever were placed in ritual use. But many of them have parallel pieces made by the same artists, which are in ritual use in homes or synagogues, but the pieces that we own may have never passed through that actual ritual ceremonial use.
Gabe, we have one more question from Nina Schneider asking how we're celebrating Hanukkah this year in the time of the pandemic. Do you want to address that, or shall I?
You can take it, Mina, sure.
Well, actually, my husband and I will be at home lighting candles and eating potato latkes on our own and FaceTiming with our grandchildren who live outside of Boston.
Hanukkah ritual, actually, in many ways, has always been pandemic friendly, in that the tradition in many communities was, in terms of publicizing the miracle, as it is called in Hebrew, is to place the Hanukkah lamp in the window to let everyone know that the ritual is happening, so it can be seen by others. And that sharing seems to be very COVID friendly behind glass, just like behind glass here in the display. And in some ways, with Hanukkah just starting this week, part of the NCMA celebration of Hanukkah is this event as a precursor to the celebration. So we're celebrating it on Zoom.
Wonderful. And we will close out with one final question here from Ellen K. The museum has featured clothing as art. Is there no talus that was created as art, which you can include in collection?
So as I mentioned when I discussed the Torah mantles, the museum's gallery, because of its beautiful light-filled airiness, is also dangerous for textiles. And thus the collection does not include ritual textiles, with the exception of the replica facsimile models of these Torah mantles, which were made for display, but which are not historic objects. We are looking at some contemporary examples that may let us do stuff, and we are looking forward to an opportunity in the future when the collection can broaden itself to include works on paper and parchment and textiles, when we've come up with some way in the future to manage the glorious light levels which enrich the collection, but also limit its possibilities. So at that point, we would be thrilled to include prayer shawls, as well as a plethora of other types of objects. But for the moment, we enjoy the light of Hanukkah and the light in the gallery, but have to limit our menu to wondrous works in metal and other media. We do include examples in glass, for example.
Thank you, Gabe. What a wonderful afternoon. I've learned so much, and I can't thank you enough for participating in this with us. I want to thank everybody for attending today. I want to apologize again for any technical problems we may have experienced, but hopefully you had a good time and learned a little bit, and will be encouraged to come and visit the museum in person when you're able to do so. The North Carolina Museum of Art is now open from Wednesdays to Sundays from 10 to 5, and our incredible more than 130-acre park with trails, places to picnic, outdoor cafe service, and art on the grounds is open every day from dawn to dusk. Thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you here sometime soon.
Thank you. Best wishes to all. Wonderful to join you on Zoom, and I look forward to joining you sometime soon in person at the museum.